Welcome back to the Freezer Method podcast. In this episode, we are diving into the world of cross-training and how that can help your HYROX performance. Joining me today is Dylan Scott, TFM coach and multiple times HYROX Elite 15 athlete. Let's get started. Let's get started with this episode, Dylan. You are, I think, known as an athlete and as a coach that is using like a lot of cross-training for your own training, for training of your athletes. I think at TFM we use it overall a lot and not just go super specific with the whole HYROX thing. But just in your eyes, before we dive deeper, can you explain why cross-training can be important for HYROX athletes and how it can help to prevent, injuries and boost like just the overall performance?
Yeah, so I think if we look at, first off, when people are coming into HYROX, with it being a new sport, they're almost always coming from a different sporting background. All right. So everybody's going to come in, whether they were a runner, whether they were a rower, whether they were a cyclist, whether they were somebody who was a CrossFit athlete who was doing a lot of like lifting based metcons. You're always going to come in with your bias towards what has basically built you as an athlete. And with HYROX being as broad ranging of a sport as it is, you have both like the potential for the gift of saying, I can train multiple different ways and still be making progress, while also possibly being hindered by the fact that you've only ever trained one way for like a long period of time. So you've got to look at the fact that just because I've deviated from what it is that I did that built me as an athlete up to this point and started introducing different modalities and different ways to train, doesn't mean that that's not going to still be a path forward. And to really like just kind of dial in on that specifically, I think me coming from a running background, knowing a lot of runners, seeing a lot of runners get into this sport, one of the very first things that they always bring up when you're talking with them about their training programs is their mileage and how they don't want their mileage to decrease, because mileage is a currency in which runners kind of trade off of. How many miles a week are you running? How many miles is your long? Like, it's a very tightly knit thing to what is correlated as overall fitness for runners. So when you start to get them integrated into a program where you're like, listen, your running mileage is going to drop down. You're not going to be doing as much as you were doing in the past, strictly on that metric. I need you to start applying value to these other things and realizing how that is actually contributing to the fitness equation over just purely specifically what you've always deemed to be, this is how I get fit. I run 80 miles a week. No, you don't. Not anymore. You run 45 to 50 miles a week and you cross train for another 6 hours or so. And come to find out, you might end up being a better overall athlete and potentially even faster at running with that kind of approach. There's a lot of athletes in the running space that have figured out that value, have figured out the trade-off to injury ratio, just kind of the ROI of spending time on what are somewhat run-specific movement patterns, but not run-specific with regards to the impact and everything that it takes on your body. And they found that, hey, I can use this for kind of that low-end stuff and occasionally that high-end stuff that if I do too much of from a pure running perspective, I get injured. And overall, that fitness equation compounds into a higher number than if I was just focused on one thing. Yeah. So you've got to weigh that in.
Yeah. I think we agree that like cross-training just can help to balance variety with specificity for like HYROX training and HYROX demands. Like, can it make maybe a bit more fun and, not that straightforward over like years and years and seasons. I think it can help us to just boost endurance, strength, and also the mobility aspect, right, of athletes and training.
Well, yeah, there's that. And there, like you've brought up the fun aspect to it. Doing the same thing every single day or the same modality every single day for not like weeks or months, But if you think long-term training for years, it can get so boring. And I think that's one thing that people really love about the HYROX space is that
Mhm.
you can create so many different sessions and there's so much stuff that you can mix in. And in doing that, again, you could fall into the trap of doing too much just HYROX specific stuff. Like sometimes you just need to do boring shit. Like just do long, boring aerobic stuff. Um, but then other times when you're coming out of like, I've been training this really boring way for a long time, it's okay to mix it up. Totally fine. Throw something in there that's kind of off the wall, a little bit different, a little bit random. And I guarantee you that in some way, shape, or form, it's going to play into one of those aid stations or the running. Um, because it really is a full test of fitness. You can be doing things that seemingly are like somebody might ask, like, what would the value of a toes to bar be? That doesn't, there's nothing within HYROX that includes a bar.
Mhm.
But toes to bar. All right, perfect. You're using the midline, the same thing that you're going to be using when you're doing ski erg. All right, you're using grip work, the same thing that you're going to need for farmers carries. There's still a little bit of aerobic capacity there. You're training your back to a degree, the same way in which
Mhm.
you're going to have to use for your sled pull and rowing. So it's like all of a sudden we've thrown toes to bar in a workout, and you didn't realize that you were training 3 stations at once. Um, and so being able to do all of that and have all that in there increases just the variety at which you can train. And like you said, takes the boredom factor out.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I think in the end, we really have to say that, there are so many ways to train, especially when we just look at the broad range of fitness. And in the end, our aerobic, anaerobic system, first place, doesn't know what we are doing. It just knows that, like, what basically the system just gets a stimulus in the end. And it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
know if you're running, biking, skiing, if you, lift a dumbbell, like a medium heavy dumbbell for like an hour. I think at some point we have to go specific, but we
Mm-hmm.
can also just do an aerobic builder session over an hour with like an EMOM or something while doing body weight movements and lifting a dumbbell. So that's why that is, like I think a super interesting topic that is still overlooked. When we look at the top forms of cross training that directly benefit HYROX performance in terms of endurance, activities like cycling, swimming, rowing. What do you feel like are the most beneficial forms of that, and what do you personally use a lot with like yourself and your athletes?
Yeah. So if you're looking for just overall, hey, I'm trying to add volume in, um, and I just want it to be, steady aerobic volume, I
Mm-hmm.
have to push people towards the bike. Just a regular, like a concept to bike erg or any kind of spin bike or anything to that effect. I'm huge on that. I think it builds the aerobic system really well with a very low amount of damage for the amount of work that you can put in. Now, if we were looking for something where we're like, hey, we're short on time and I really want to just train, full body, I want to put myself into a pain cave. I want somebody on like an Echo or an assault bike. Um, there's not many machines that I know of that can put you in a dumpster more than one of those can if you're really working on them. And so if you're like, I'm short on time, I need to get fit really fast, that would be the direction that I would push you. And in addition to that, another thing that I'm going to add in is, of course, the rower. Like everybody knows, I love to row. I think I became a better overall athlete and a better runner from the rowing. Um, and I'll continue to stand by that and say that. But I would say those are kind of like my big 3 modalities that I try to put somebody on. All right, we're going to build big volume just for kind of the lower body and aerobic system. We're just getting on a regular bike. Okay, we're short on time and we really want to do something that is going to push us into that zone 5 area, an area that you
Mm-hmm.
don't really need to race in HYROX wise, but an area that you should probably train in just so you can expand your top end. We're going to spend some time on an Echo bike. And then if we're trying to do something in between, then I want you on a rower. So there's kind of a place for everything with regards to that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we flip it over to I want to do something that's very run movement specific, the direction that I'm going to push people towards is what's called an arc trainer. Um,
Mhm.
I've used that before in my training, and I felt like the level of translation that it has to running, when you have the settings properly on there, are very, very good. I think you can get, not, of course, not perfect specificity because you take out the impact component, but you get very good specificity for it. And you've got a lot of elite level runners that use that as their kind of domain for, all right, I know I have a lower body injury. I know that I have to take impact out to a degree. How is it that I'm going to continue to train at a really high level? They're turning to the art trainer. And that's where I would send almost all of my people who are like, I can't do this run session, but I do have access to one of those. Beautiful. We're going to replicate it on there.
Mm.
It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be 90 to 95% of what we're looking for, and we'll take that.
Cool. Cool. Yeah. I think for everyone that is new to the sport, new to running, I think could be interesting to say that, running is probably one of the most stressful sports you can like do to your body, or one of the sports that has the most impact, because with every step you do, you have an eccentric load. So like 10 times your body weight of every step is landing on your leg, and it can be pretty stressful for, muscles, tendons, your joints and everything. And it's super hard to recover from that from a certain point on in terms of volume. So it can make sense to, cut out some of the run volume and go over to things Dylan mentioned. Do you personally feel like there is like a sweet spot for HYROX beginners to just get through their first race in terms of running mileage they have to hit every week, and as well for, like maybe athletes that really want to hit a good pro time looking at the elite or something?
Yeah, so I tell most people, like, if you're wanting to come in and you're wanting to come run and experience a HYROX and do decent, not amazing or anything like that, if you can get your running up to 20 miles a week, that'd be a great place to stay at. Or I mean, if we're talking from a kilometer standpoint, just over 30K a week. If you can run around there with a couple of HYROX specific sessions, not on in addition to the mileage, but just overall. So you're running 20 miles a week. You've got some HYROX specific sessions, some weights in there, and everything. You're probably going to be okay. If you're coming in and you're trying to race at a high or higher level, you're going to need to be in that like 40, 50 mile a week if you're doing a lot of cross training on the side. If running is going to be your real bread and butter aerobic place, you might need to be 60 to 70 if you're not doing a lot of stuff on top of that. I'm a fan for myself of running in the 40 to 45 mile a week range. So about 70 to 80K is where I'll be at most of the time. And then I just stack on top of that a ton of mileage and meters on the ergs. I think that keeps me healthy. As you were saying about all the eccentric impact and the load and everything that goes into it, that's a lot of muscular damage, and it's really hard for the body to recover from that, and then to be able to do the other work that you need to do from a weight perspective, from a high power output perspective, and even from a like holding on to any kind of muscle mass perspective. Because I mean, there's a reason that you don't see bodybuilders running very much. They almost always choose the bike, and it's because of how catabolic and damaging running is to building muscle. It's not to say that you can't do it. You absolutely can, but and plenty of people do. But it is to say that if you were to choose a modality to train after you've done weights and you're trying to put on any kind of size or anything like that, you should not choose running. Like that would be the wrong direction to go with things. So with that, yeah, your newer athletes, build your way up to about 20 miles a week. Your athletes that are cross training heavily and trying to race at a high level, if you're around 40 to 45, you're good. And then if you're going to make running your big kind of aerobic block sort of component, then you probably need to be 60 to 70 to be really competitive.
If you would want to, cut out running volume, would you just replace a kilometer by kilometer on the erg, or the same time domain, or how would you do that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the way that I've done it is if you're doing bike to run, I've always done like a 3-to-1 ratio. If you're doing row to run or anything like that, I'll do like a 2-to-1. or if I'm just doing from a time perspective, I'll do 10 minutes to the mile is what
Okay.
I put in my head. So like normally for me, if I'm doing aerobic work, run wise, I'm running about 7 minutes per mile or somewhere around the 410 to 420 kilometer pace. So when I look at that, how would that translate over across those two? A 10 minute to 1 mile ratio from a cross training perspective tends to make sense to me. So a 60-minute
Mm-hmm.
row, and it's good for a 6 mile run. If we're all just trying to funnel that into one metric, that's how I've approached it.
Yeah.
Other coaches that I've read about in the past that have been run specific coaches when they've pushed their athletes to a cross training methodology that's close to what they've done as well as a 10-to-1 kind of ratio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it can work really well. I think nothing can like replace running volume, but I mean, I run my PB race after 10 weeks off running, just sitting on the bike in HYROX with like high volume, obviously, but it can build really, really good fitness. And it's sometimes overlooked, but I mean, and we spoke about a lot about endurance kind of things. When we look at, strength focused disciplines, CrossFit,
Mm-hmm.
Olympic lifting, powerlifting, those kind of things, where, do they find their place in training for HYROX? Like, any
Yeah,
thoughts
so
on that?
I mean, you want to make sure that the way in which you're training is also helping from a resiliency standpoint, a muscular
Mm-hmm.
endurance standpoint, and a power output standpoint. And there's only so much you can do from the aerobic and machine side before you have to start overloading the body with weights. Um, where if we break down a run movement pattern, when you get into that stance position where your knee's slightly bent, you're loading up, you're about to press through and then kind of push that toe off right there. Well, when you're doing things to strengthen your hips, like say weighted box step ups or, heavy lunges or even, box squats or something like that. If you look at like run specific weight stuff or like what sprinters do, close to all of their movement is going to be working on some kind of foot down, power into the ground, explode off, or some form of triple extension, which is what you're getting when you're pushing off of the ground with that back kick of the leg, where you're getting the hip,
Mm-hmm.
the knee, and the ankle all, and you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I produce the most force and power off the ground? How quickly can I get that leg to loop back through to get down onto the ground again so that I'm spending the least amount of time with my foot on the ground? We want the least amount of ground contact, we want the most amount of force transference, and we want the quickest recovery and efficiency for that. Well, one way to do that is to train those movements under weight and to train them fast and to train them heavy, because you're going to have to get those muscle fibers and motor units to fire off more so than you could do if you were just sprinting or running or doing some kind of other low intensity work. Without an overload from the outside, you're not going to become as strong and resilient or as powerful as you could be. Um, and so if that's not finding its way into your training, I would say 2 times a week at least, then you're missing out, because there's a lot of benefit to be had there by neglecting strength training and just overall really strength and power training, because those two things are different.
Yeah. I think when we look at it, every kind of strength training is already cross training, right? I mean, super specific would be strength training on the sled. Just push
Mm-hmm.
a heavy sled, do your sets there, do a heavy sled pull, right? But as you said, I think we should always look at the movement patterns we have that are waiting for us on race day, break those down and pick, our weakest points in the chain, basically, and transfer that over into our strength training. I think we can use a lot of movements out of the strength room to like level up our HYROX performance in the end, by using CrossFit, using Olympic lifting,
Mm-hmm.
all those kind of things, or even kettlebells, right? I mean, so many ways to do that. I think sometimes you really have to think outside the box and really just use or think about movements as tools, like strength movements or all movements that we're doing are just tools. And I don't think where I think every single movement can be replaced with something else. If you're not feeling good with something, I think there's not a magic movement you have to do. And I think, yeah, you have to figure that out for yourself. With yourself, with your coach, look at where are the weak points, and work on that, right?
Yeah. And you bring up the point about like kettlebells and everything like that. Each type of weight, its design and strength training tool all have their specific place in a training. So if you're trying to lift just maximally super heavy, total just strength output, you're not going to pick something like a kettlebell or anything like that. You want to decrease all instability or any kind of problems that you would have on that front so that you can focus on fuel just fully. All right, I want every damn motor unit I could get to fire off. And I don't want there to be some weird instability going on that I'm now having to compensate for, and it's actually not allowing me to recruit the biggest muscle fibers that I can. But then there are other times where you are going to want to challenge those smaller muscles, and you're going to want to find those weaknesses and those areas that begin to fail on you in the race. And that's where the instability and the instability for duration starts to build in that muscular endurance side of things. So like if we look at going really heavy, we're picking a barbell and a stable platform. But if we're looking at, all right, so what's something that you tend to see out of a lot of people late in races when they get to the lunges? Man, they're wobbling side to side. Their core starting to fail on them, which is causing them to not have a stable platform beneath them when they're putting their foot down. Well, in that case, we should be training with some kind of unstable forces when we're doing that same movement, because what we start to do is we start to create that stable platform again, and now we can be strong. So if you can train in ways that find your weak points that start to show up in races by using different methods, different types of weights, then what you can start to do is you can overall start to create the stable platform that you need from your body, which will then allow you to be strong, which is the strength work that you've built. So there's all an interplay with it. And they each have their place when it's correctly used.
Exactly. Agreed. Yeah. And we spoke about, cross training in terms of endurance, in terms of strength, and the good things about it. But do you feel like there are any cross training methods that, might hinder HYROX performance? Something that would be too much all over the place. Too unspecific.
I don't know if there is one that I would say, hey, don't do that, because it's so random and unspecific that it doesn't help. But I would say that there are those that are better and those that are worse. Like I'm just thinking about certain machines and things that I see in the gym that you could use it. Like you could go train on that. It's probably not going to do you much harm, but is it going to do you more good to choose that than if you chose something else? So I think that you could just basically rank certain modalities for training. Again, if I go back to the arc trainer, I'm going to rank the arc trainer over an elliptical, and I'm going to rank an elliptical over, like, there's these like little octane trainer things that do a lot of side to side movement that it almost replicates ice skating kind of deal. And I get it. It'll get your heart rate up, but it's a movement pattern that is so unspecific to the movement pattern that you'll actually be doing, that to do that for long durations and high volume doesn't make sense to get much benefit from. Be better than nothing, but it wouldn't be that great. Or like, even if, I don't know, like if you were just going to assault bike with your arms, well, I'd rather you ski erg, like just things like that. There's going to be more specific movement to using the ski erg versus, unless you have like I don't know, you have a boot on and you can't stand properly. But again, you're having to really start to get into the like, all right, what are all of the preconditions that I have that are preventing me from picking the better option? But
I think there's like time, room, and space for everything, but
yeah,
not everything is perfect, and some things are better than others. And I think it's also always important to look at, in which extent like we do those things. Like powerlifting program can help us, but do we really have to get as strong as a powerlifter, or do we just have, to put a bit of weight on the barbell and that's it? Same with the endurance training, right? Like biking is great, but do I have to go on a 7-hour bike ride? Maybe I can, and maybe it's going to help me, but which impact does it have on my other training days? And maybe this is going to hold me back, on, power output, speed for the next session, where I have to bring all that stuff again. So I think, yeah, I think there are a lot of like little units you can like move around and stuff.
Yeah,
But
and there's people have probably heard of Mark Bell, and he's a powerlifting coach, and athlete himself, and he's got a saying that strength is never a weakness, and weakness is never a strength. And so it is really, really good to be really, really strong. That's great. But I've got an athlete who's joining on, and we're talking. He's coming from like a powerlifting background, and he was like, "Yeah, I squat like pretty heavy." I was like, "Yeah, you're just talking to you. You're squatting what, in the 500s and change?" He's like, "Yeah." Like, and I was like, "We have no need for that. Like that's great. I'm glad you can squat that much. But when I go in and program for you to squat off of like percentages and everything like that, we're not even going to take that approach, because I don't want you squatting 80% of 500 because not because your muscles can't handle it, but when you start loading a bar that heavy, now your nervous system's getting blown up. It becomes a different thing that you're worried about. You're like, all right, your structural components might be okay, but the level of fatigue that begins to happen because of how hard your nervous system is having to work to get all those muscular components to fire off to move a weight that is, when you're deadlifting 700 plus, when you're squatting 500, like, I'm like, dude, I don't need you doing that. There's no need for it.
you don't do that on a weekly basis?
Say what?
You don't do that on a weekly basis? Yeah.
No, I don't. I put 500 pounds on a bar and get under it, and my spine will disintegrate, Marcus. Like, we do not do that. There is no need for that. So, and that's where like the difference between, dude, you can go heavy as all get out on a sled, and you can recover from that so much faster than when you have what's called axial loading, and you put that weight onto your actual frame versus pushing against that weight. Totally different neural stimulus. You can push heavy sleds and you can recover from that. So I'll have my athletes be like, yeah, dude, if you want to load that thing up and see how hard you can go. But I would never say that for them if it came to like a big lift, like a squat or a deadlift, because that can mess you up for days.
Yeah, true. And I think there's also the component of, overcomplicating training with cross training, doing too many different modalities. What would you say? I mean, when we look at endurance training, strength training, we pick 2 endurance training modalities, maybe 4 strength training modalities that can help us, our movement patterns. Let's put it that way. Which ones are the ones we are putting, first, second place, which you would say, okay, those are bringing in, the most benefit into athletes training. They train for HYROX.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're going to go ahead and say that running is already like in there. All right. And we're deviating off of running. If we're deviating off of running for just, I'm putting somebody on a bike and I'm putting somebody on a rower. Those are the 2 things that I'm going to choose for them. We're going to get on a bike or on a rower. And I'm picking this because I'm assuming that they can still do all the running they need to do. If they couldn't do running, then it would change. But I'm going to say, hey, we're going to add to your running. We're not going to replace it. We're going to go bike and rower. And then from a lifting perspective, I'm a big fan of lunges. I think that heavy lunges have a good transference over to HYROX. I like front squats, not personally, like physically. Physically, I hate front squats, but overall, for the value that they create, I think that they're pretty beneficial. So I would like front squatting in there. I would also like some kind of clean movement. preferably like a power clean kind of movement. I would like that in there. And then one other thing probably good to have. I'm biased a little bit towards being able to do some kind of overhead pressing.
Mhm.
So I think if you're like, all right, what are 4 movement patterns that we need to train? I want a front squat, I want a lunge, I want some kind of clean, and I want some overhead movement. You give me those 4 right there, and I think you're doing pretty well. And then
Yeah.
from a cardio standpoint, we're doing a bike and a rower. What about yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd agree on that. I mean, I personally think those are the most beneficial ones. I mean, when we look at the movement patterns, those are the ones that are waiting for us on race day. And I think we can then take those 4 movements and think big, right? We can use them for strength training 2 times a week. And then we can go into like cross training in terms of endurance training again and say, okay, hey, now we're going to row 5 times a kilometer and put some of those movements in between and say, okay, hey, we put whatever round 1 30 dumbbell clean and jerks in there. So we have that power clean movement and the press movement you
Mm-hmm.
wanted to have. We can do some, dumbbell front squats in there, high repetition, bring the heart rate into zone 2, zone 3, whatever. And, work on our endurance base while cross training. And just spread those movements over the week in different time domains and different repetition numbers, right? Set numbers, and create a different stimulus with those modalities instead of just hammering the HYROX stations over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I mean, like, so if we think about a station that a lot of folks worry about, try to train on, is wall balls.
Mm-hmm.
You will get more benefit from training some kind of like barbell thruster for a wall ball than you will from doing just crazy amounts of wall balls.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, for the overall like stress of it. Because if you're doing, a day where you do 400 wall balls, your legs are cooked up for a while, you know? Versus if you're training a lower amount but a heavier weight, doing some kind of barbell thruster movement or something. I think that has more benefit to it, and less kind of residual fatigue time, as long as you've got the cardiovascular side pinned down, and that's not your limiting factor on the wall balls. You're not getting gassed because you're doing wall balls for 3.5, 4 minutes straight at the end of the race. You're blowing up because your legs aren't producing enough power. Your shoulders are failing on you. Well, if that's where you're failing at, well, then you should go to the heavier side of things. If your failure point is just cranking out repetitions, then maybe it does make sense to do some high rep, lower weight work. But that's to be decided upon athlete by athlete. That's the thing. You race and you train and you trial and you figure out your failure points, and then you adapt your training to figure out what it is that you should be implementing, to make sure that those failure points become non-existent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When we look at, let's say a standard training week of someone that is, training 5 times to 6 times a week,
Mm-hmm.
how often do you feel like athletes should cross train and not just do the HYROX specific movements in the end? Or can't we even say that in your eyes? And it's basically every day a cross training day because we mix up things.
Yeah, I think
Let's
actually
put it that way. Yeah.
every day has some kind of cross training component to it.
Mhm.
Because I mean, you would say that anytime you touched a rower, that's technically specific. Anytime you touch a skier, that's specific. Anytime you run, that's like you have 8 different things that you might be doing that could be considered specific. Any kind of bike work, I guess, is considered cross training. If I had an athlete that was training 6 times a week, they're probably on the bike 2 to 3, you know,
Mhm.
and that's going to be like a lot of their just kind of low level base work. And then on top of that, they're full body lifting 2 times a week. They're doing like a HYROX specific metcon that's going to include multiple different portions of the race within it 1 time a week. They're going to be doing like a pairing of a station with either an actual specific movement or a movement pattern that is similar with a different kind of stimulus. And then they're going to have like one really hard run specific workout. And then they're going to have some easy running mixed in as well. So it's like you're hitting on a little bit of everything within there. And the cross training is really just used as all right, we've already got the foundation of a good program, but what I want to do is I want to compound on it with some extra work that I know is going to have some dividends, but is not going to be super costly to me from a fatigue standpoint. So I would say that's what the majority of like my weeks look like, and the majority of my athletes' weeks end up looking like. Until we start getting towards race specific time points, and then things tinker a little bit.
Yeah. With all the social media stuff we see out there, I think we see a lot of athletes posting, some fancy movements, some fancy stuff. Do you feel like there are any red flags in your eyes that are, just showing someone is doing too much cross training or is going all over the place?
I mean, the thing, social media is different than elite performance training in that social media is sensationalist. You're trying to get people's attention. You're trying to show them something that they're not used to, something that's fun and interesting and isn't just this kind of the boring side of training. That is what actually produces outcomes in fitness. Overall, if you're trying to get really fit, you just need to be very consistent and very methodical. You don't have to be that creative, actually. It doesn't, you don't need that much creativity in your training, and that can get boring to people. So you'll see stuff online where folks are putting together these really complex workouts, and it's like, man, it's got 7 parts to it, and you're adding in all these different kind of weird movements and everything. And not weird in that they're not effective, but they're just not like, all right,
it's overcomplicated.
Yeah, why are we doing we probably don't need, a burpee into a bar muscle up over the bar and back. Like, I've seen those before. Somebody sent me that the other day, and it was literally this guy would do a burpee, he'd do a bar muscle up, he'd go over the bar, he'd go to the other side, he'd do a burpee. I'm like, that's great. Like, that's awesome. I wish I could do it. Can't. But in terms of should that be programmed into any kind of workout for anything other than novelty? No. Like, it doesn't have much place there. So
I think training can be and should be pretty often stupid simple, right?
Yeah.
I think I don't post a lot at the moment on social media, and I think I train more than I have trained in the last 2 or 3 years, but I don't feel like there's any point to post anything because it's just too simple. There's no fancy stuff happening. You just run a few running intervals and hit a few erg intervals and maybe touch a dumbbell. That's making you fitter in the end, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, if I post a decent amount of my training up, and a lot of it's not that complicated. It's very simple stuff. Like, the most complicated thing I've posted up recently was I did a mix of like handstand practice, double unders with rowing, sandbag cleans, wall balls and stuff. And that wasn't even because I thought it was a great HYROX workout. I just had fun. That was it. I was like, oh, this was fun. This is a fun workout to do. It had no real applicability to being a better HYROX athlete. And I also would never put it out there as, hey, this is a great HYROX workout. It's okay. It trains a lot of your body. But most of all, I was like, dude, it's my lunch break. I've got 40 minutes here. I just want to have a good time. Cool, let's do this for 40 minutes. And then I'm going to go back to work because it makes me happy. And so, yeah, I think that's just to say that sometimes even I have to catch myself when I sit down and I'm writing workouts for people and I'm like, oh, I got to make this interesting. I'm like, no, I'm not. If they really want, what are they here for? Are they here to be entertained or are they here to get fit? If you're here to get fit, you might just have to do some boring shit for a while. And then when you go run a PR, you can be happy then. Like,
yeah. I mean, let me tell you, back in my cycling days, when we prepped for the best years, the biggest seasons, we basically had like 3 routes we drove over and over and over again. It was a 50-kilometer flat route for the easy days, and then we had 21-kilometer hilly route, which had like a 3.5 kilometer incline, super steep, where we did our intervals at and like strength training on the bike. And then we had another route that we just used for also like some zone 2 training, but that's basically it. And we just hammered either 2 to 3 of those, or 2 to 4 of those, 50-kilometer routes, or 5 to 8 of the 20-kilometer ones, and just hammered the hill every time we crossed it, and then had 30 minutes off, cycling around, hammered that hill again. And we basically did that from the age of 10 to 7, 18. I just met a guy, my old training partner, the son of my coach, back in Germany. We went for a run, and he said, man, I asked him, hey, do you still go on those routes? And he was like, no, man, after 20 years, I'm good. Yeah. But he did it for 20 years, and that's it. And, he rides on a high level. It can be stupid simple. Yeah. It doesn't have to, and it should be fun. But yeah.
Dude, some of the best, it's funny that you have that story of the different routes that you would run, or the different routes that you would ride, because when I got in probably the best running shape that I was in back in high school competing, I would just go out to we have a national like historic site in my hometown, and our cross country course was out there, and it was a loop course, and you would run that loop, and it'd be 3.1, and every one of my runs I would just run it forward, and I'd run it backwards. And if I was doing 15K, I'd run it forwards again. And if I was doing 20K, I'd run it backwards again. The number of times that I ran that cross country course, if you wanted me to sit down and close my eyes and run it in my head, I could run it in my head. I could get on a treadmill and I could go for a run in those woods right now. And I could remember every little nook and turn and tree. And it just, because you travel that route so many times. And boredom isn't, it's almost like boredom isn't there. It goes away after a while. You get all up in your head and you're just off somewhere else. And so it's funny that you've got those 3 routes that I still go home and run that thing. When I go back home, I'm like, I got to go take a visit. I love it.
I was driving it when we were moving, between the move from Germany to Spain. We were in our home city, and I went on the bike and went on those routes again and said, hey, let's give it a go. Let's see how it feels. Felt good. Yeah, felt good.
Yeah.
Cool. I think one last point we maybe want to touch base on is, strengthening weak areas to avoid imbalances due to cross training. I think that's something we maybe touched base on, but I think that's a super important point, because I think, when we're just doing the monotonous HYROX stuff over and over again, we could build some imbalances in our body. And I think due to that, it can be super important to, build some single leg stuff or unilateral stuff into your training to avoid these and stay healthy. Do you do that personally on a weekly basis also with your athletes, or how do you handle that at the moment?
Yeah, so if we think about HYROX, it's a very forward and back kind of sport. HYROX is not a very lateral movement heavy kind of sport. In that the only time that you're really doing much lateral movement is on a crowded course. You might be shifting side to side, running through people. You might be making some sharp turns when you're pivoting within and out of the rock zone and stuff like that. But you can get stuck in just that singular plane where you're not ever really doing anything to build the supporting structures to the outside, that would help to strengthen at the hips and the knees. And you want to make sure that you're doing movements at times that are causing you to load things laterally, and to have loads that are coming crossways through your body that cause you to have to counteract against those to maintain a good midline. So I will do movements where I'll do like we'll have a kettlebell here, kettlebell overhead. We're doing walking lunges here, where I'm getting these forces that are acting on me from outside that are causing me to have to maintain a good central position. Or I'm doing something where I'm jumping side to side, that's causing me to have to plant and catch and fire off at the glute and the hip to help to keep the knee kind of in line. Because another thing that can come from, if you're not doing a lot of this lateral training and everything, you can start to just lose efficiency, run wise and movement pattern wise, because you're getting all this wobble. It's again going back to what I had said earlier. When we're trying to produce force and strength, what do we want? Stable platform. And if when we're hitting the ground and we're having all of this kind of pitch and wobble and movement and our muscles aren't firing off well or anything like that, well, we're not on a stable platform, and all we're doing is we're just playing with instead of a taut rope, we're playing with a slack line, and if you've got all that wiggling there, there's always going to be like, all right, now it's got to taunt itself back out, then we can pull. It's the same thing as if you grab the sled pull and the sled rope wasn't all the way there. You've got to get it there, then you can make progress. Well, think about that with when your leg's hitting the ground. All right, everything's not rigid. We're not creating force initially. We got all this slop that's going on. Then it gets straight. Then we make force. Well, that's just extra time. So if you're not getting into a place where you've been working things side to side, where you can make sure that you're just creating a very good line of force production throughout the body, well, then you're missing out on power output, basically, and it's just getting lost. So I try to include stuff within my training and within my athletes' training that causes them to have to work across those little problems, and just challenge your body in funny ways.
Yeah, cool. Perfect. I think that's a good closing point here. I think we covered a lot of stuff. So I think if someone has any questions about that, feel free to put that into the comments. Let's say if someone, would like to hear something about a certain topic, feel free to put that into the comments or send us, just a quick message, and we are happy to maybe grab that topic for one of the next episodes. If you're looking for training, come over to our website. I think the link down there is in the video description. And I think, Dylan, our next episode is not going to be filmed before your Las Vegas race. So someone wants to watch Dylan racing hard, join him at the Las Vegas Major in, when is it? 12 days, 11 days?
Yeah. 12 days from today. So it'll be Friday on the 31st. And I promise I will race better than Amsterdam.
Yeah, that's going to be fine. It's going to be good. You're looking sharp. All the best for that race, I think, from everyone. And let's say we hear us in the next episode.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much. And of course, nice jacket.
Nice jacket. Link in the description.